Welcome back to the channel. We tend to view history through the lens of glory A's, pilots, fiery dogfights, and medals pinned to proud uniforms. But today, we're taking a different path. We're stepping onto the runway into the grease and grime to examine a machine that blurred the line between technological marvel and war crime. If you are new here, brace yourself. The story of the Messerschmitt 163 Komet is not a tale of flight. It is a story of survival inside a flying bomb. Imagine standing on the cold concrete of Brandis Airfield in late 1944. The roar of engines has faded, replaced by a silence heavier than combat. This is the domain of Hans, a battle-hardened ground crew chief. He has seen too much war to believe in miracles and now stands alone in the dim light of the airfield. In his hands is a high-pressure water nozzle aimed at the small tailless aircraft that has just returned from the sky. It rests on a skid wheel-less looking deceptively harmless. The plane resembles a creature from the future, a plump metallic egg. But Hans knows better than anyone. He knows this beast never truly sleeps. He tightens his grip on the hose, his knuckles whitening inside his gloves. Not from the cold, but from what he must wash off the aluminum skin. He squeezes the trigger. A jet of water blasts out, slamming against the fuselage. With the Komet, cleaning is not routine maintenance, it is forensic decontamination. Water runs down the cockpit sides, pooling on the runway. At first, it is murky, like ordinary dirt, nothing unusual for a war-torn airfield. Then the color begins to change. When the water mixes with the fluid leaking from the cockpit, it turns a pale pink, a sickly shade that tightens Hans's stomach. It isn't hydraulic oil, it isn't grease. It is the result of a chemical reaction between T-Stoff and human organic tissue. In the laboratory, T-Stoff is concentrated hydrogen peroxide, a powerful oxidizer. But for Hans and the ground crew, it is simply death in liquid form. They know that inside the cramped cockpit, the pilot sat wedged between tanks of corrosive chemicals. No armor, just centimeters of space and a fragile hope. Hans watches the pink water spiral into the drain and remembers the sound that haunts his sleep. Not explosions, but the hiss of dissolving flesh. The Komet was built to save Germany, a desperate weapon for a desperate hour. It was the fastest manned object in the sky, a vertical sledgehammer. But as Hans continues spraying, he thinks about the cost of that speed. He thinks of the young men strapped into these machines with promises of glory. They wore rubber suits, reeking of asbestos and fear. They were called heroes, pioneers of a new aviation age. But as Hans sees the concrete beneath his boots corroding, he sees the truth. These men were not pilots. They were disposable biological components. They were obedient meat used to guide a volatile chemical reaction into the sky. And when the system failed, the machine consumed them. The last of the water runs clear, washing away the visible evidence of the plane's brutality. But the stinging odor lingers, burning his nostrils. Hans shuts off the hose, wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a long smear of grease. He stares into the empty cockpit, the black hole that has swallowed too many friends. A distant air raid siren wails, announcing another sortie, another cycle of sacrifice. Cleaning is done and the ritual begins anew. Heavy canvas tarps on a transport truck are pulled aside, dumping a new batch of recruits onto the oil-stained floor of the hangar. They look nothing like soldiers, but like schoolboys playing dress-up in uniforms too large for their thin bodies. Hans wipes his greasy hands on a rag and watches them from the shadows, beneath the wing. He has seen this scene unfold dozens of times. They arrive with puffed chests and bright eyes fueled by propaganda film. They saw in Berlin cinemas. They speak of fatherland duty and miracle weapons that will reverse the course of a war already lost. To Hans, they don't look like reinforcements. They look like livestock. Clean, unscarred, and unaware that they have been delivered to an abattoir disguised as an airfield. Among them, one face stands out, not because he is older, but because he is even younger. His name is Lucas. He can't be more than 19. With blonde hair and the sharply defined jaw, so beloved by recruitment posters. While the others huddle nervously, adjusting collars, Lucas walks straight toward the Me 163 Komet, resting on its lift. He approaches the machine with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He runs a gloved hand along the trailing edge sweep of its wing, marveling at the flawless, seamless surface. To him, this lump of wood and metal is the pinnacle of German engineering, a blazing comet that will ferry him to glory. He sees speed. He sees altitude. He sees the Iron Cross he is certain he will wear. Hans approaches, heavy boots thudding against the hangar floor, breaking the boy's trance. He doesn't salute. He simply gestures for Lucas to follow him up the small ladder to the cockpit. Time for the first lesson, the one flight manuals conveniently omit. Hans points, Inside the cramped interior, a space so small it is more coffin than cockpit. He wants Lucas to see exactly where he will sit. With a filthy finger, he traces the path of the fuel tanks. He shows the boy that the cockpit is not surrounded by tanks, it is carved into them. There is the main T-Stoff tank holding hundreds of liters of unstable oxidizer sitting directly behind the pilot's headrest. It is only centimeters from the spine, separated by a thin metal wall. Then there are the C-Stoff tanks in the wings and around the legs. Brilliant in terms of space efficiency, catastrophic in terms of safety. Hans explains without words, using only his hands and tight jaw. The pilot is essentially sitting inside a bathtub filled with explosives. If the mixture leaks, if a gasket fails, if a bullet punctures the wrong valve, the pilot won't burn, he will chemically disintegrate. Hans taps the armored canopy, emphasizing that once the latch closes, there is no easy escape. The Komet is a sealed system. Lucas listens, or at least pretends to, but his eyes remain locked on the airspeed indicator, which stretches to the terrifying number of 1,000 kilometers per hour. The boy is intoxicated by numbers. He doesn't see danger, he sees possibility. He asks about climb rate, about the vertical launch that feels like riding a rocket to the moon. He doesn't ask about the landing skid. He doesn't ask why the plane has no wheels. He doesn't ask why the previous pilot of this very machine did not return. Hans feels a stone settle in his gut, the weight of grief for a death not yet occurred. He looks at Lucas's bright, earnest face and sees he is not training a pilot. He is preparing a sacrifice. The boy thinks he will master the machine, but Hans knows the truth. Lucas is merely the guidance system for a flying bomb, and the fuse was lit the moment he climbed off that truck. The airfield becomes a frenzy of coordinated motion, but Hans's world narrows to the two fuel trucks parked on either side of the Komet. This is the most critical phase, an operation requiring a surgeon's precision and a bomb disposal expert's nerves. Refueling the Me-163 is not filling a gas tank. It is chemical isolation. On the left is the C-Stoff truck fuel. On the right, the T-Stoff truck volatile oxidizer. Hans stands between them, a conductor of death's orchestra. He ensures the two hoses never cross, never touch, never even see each other. If one drop of T-Stoff lands on a rag soaked with C-Stoff, the resulting explosion will vaporize everything. The air is thick with tension and the metallic sting of chemicals. Hans watches a young crewman barely older than Lucas struggle with the heavy T-Stoff coupling. The boy's hands tremble. Whether from cold or fear of the distant sirens doesn't matter. Hans sees the slip before it happens. The coupling slams against the fuselage. A faint hiss rises as several drops of concentrated peroxide splatter onto the tarmac. Smoke curls upward instantly, white and furious. Hans doesn't shout, he moves. 2 strides and he is there, shoving the rookie aside and blasting the area with water diluting the chemical before it can react. The puddle sizzles and foams like a witch's cauldron, a small but terrifying reminder of the beast sleeping beneath the Komet's aluminum shell. Silence is broken by the sharp bark of the squadron commander. He strides across the runway, leather coat billowing, ignoring the still smoldering patch of ground. He doesn't care about the near disaster. He cares about timing. American bomber formations have been spotted over Leipzig, and every second of delay means death. He orders the refueling to continue immediately, brushing aside Hans's objections about checking the corroded rubber seals. Hans looks at the officer, then at the terrified rookie. Finally, he looks at Lucas, pale but resolute, by the wing. There is no room for debate. The logic of war has replaced the logic of survival. Hans turns to Lucas to begin suiting him up. This is not like dressing a knight in armor. It is like wrapping a mummy in a silent, heavy ritual. The protective suit is thick, asbestos-coated rubber designed not to stop bullets, but to prevent the pilot from being dissolved by his own fuel in case of a crash. It is stiff, suffocating, and reeks of industrial decay. As Hans tightens the straps around Lucas's legs and chest, a wave of nauseating déjà vu hits him. He has done this for faces he no longer remembers. He pulls the zipper closed, sealing the boy inside a chemical sarcophagus. Lucas stares at him with wide, searching eyes. Maybe the boy hopes the old mechanic will reassure him that the machine is sound, that he'll be back for dinner. Hans cannot lie. He says nothing. He simply guides Lucas up the ladder and into the cockpit. The space is so narrow his shoulders scrape the canopy frame as he slides into the seat. Hans leans in to fasten the harness, his hands moving with grim efficiency, tightening the straps across the boy's chest, an act both intimate and violent. It feels like strapping a condemned man into an electric chair. Hans checks the oxygen mask, the radio connections, and lets his hand hover for a moment over the emergency ejection handle. He wants to tell the boy to pull it at the first sign of trouble to bail out to live. But he knows that at 900 kilometers per hour, parachuting is just another way to die. He steps back and slams the canopy shut. The heavy latch locks with a metallic thud that sounds like a final verdict. He taps on the glass once a hollow goodbye. He signals the ground crew to clear the area. The ritual is complete. The sacrifice is prepared. Igniting the Walter rocket engine is not a mechanical startup. It is a chemical detonation. From his trench-like safety pit, Hans watches the exhaust plume erupt in superheated steam and invisible flame. The reaction between T-Stoff and C-Stoff is instantaneous, unleashing such violent thrust that the aircraft convulses against its chocks like a wild animal trying to chew off its own leg to escape. No slow buildup, no graceful taxi. The Komet does not roll, it leaps. Once the wheel chocks are pulled, the aircraft catapults down the runway, accelerating with physics-defying brutality. Hans squints through the haze, eyes locked on the crude two-wheeled dolly slung beneath the fuselage. This primitive trolley is the only thing keeping the plane off the ground, and it is about to become the most dangerous object on the airfield. At 250 kilometers per hour, the Komet is ready to lift. This is the moment of truth, the gamble that has claimed more pilots than Allied gunfire. Hans holds his breath as the aircraft rises cleanly. He sees Lucas pull the release cable. The dolly drops, but it doesn't roll harmlessly aside. It slams onto the concrete with tremendous force and ricochets into the air, spinning violently. For one horrifying heartbeat, the steel trolley flips upward, chasing the tail of the ascending rocket plane. It misses the fuselage by inches. Had it struck, the fragile fuel tanks would have ruptured. Lucas would have vaporized in a flash of expanding gas before clearing the tree line. The dolly crashes into the grass while the Komet converts its massive kinetic energy into a vertical climb, spearing through the clouds like an arrow fired by an angry god. Hans does not watch it disappear. He turns and runs toward the radio hut, the only link left to the boy. Inside the smoky, cramped room, the radio waves are chaos, static, and screams. He presses the headset to his ear, straining to filter the noise. He doesn't need radar to know what's happening. He can hear it in Lucas's breathing, the boy's fighting G-forces crushing his spine into the seat. His vision narrows as the sky shifts from blue to black. In under 3 minutes, Lucas is at 10,000 meters, diving toward the American B-17 formations. But triumph quickly becomes panic. Through crackling static, Hans hears the failure of the miracle weapon. The Komet is too fast. It is a technological paradox, closing on targets so quickly that the human brain cannot compute firing solutions. Hans hears Lucas shout that he overshot the bombers, that they were blurs streaking past before he could aim. The boy struggles with the stick, tries to slow down, but the rocket engine knows only full power. It is a catastrophic waste. Lucas makes pass after pass, burning precious fuel. His shots going wide, frustration rising with every second. And then the inevitable happens. The engine roar dies. Silence fills the radio. The fuel tanks are dry. The hunter has become prey. Hans collapses into a chair, already knowing what comes next. The Americans have learned the trick. They do not fight the Komet. When it is a rocket, they wait until it becomes a glider. High above the clouds, a pack of P-51 Mustangs circles patiently, like vultures waiting for the telltale white plume to stop. Now, Lucas is drifting a heavy metal glider falling from the sky with nothing to save him. The hunt is over. The mouse chase begins. Hans grips the table, knuckles white, as he hears the terrified boy report that he is descending fast with 3 enemy fighters closing in behind him. The sky over Brandis is a suffocating gray ceiling, but to Hans, it feels like the roof of the world collapsing. He stands beside the rescue truck engine, idling with anxious rumbling. His eyes scan the horizon, searching for the small returning speck that is Lucas. The radio has gone dead, the chaotic noise of combat replaced by the static of uncertainty. The P-51's break off, their job is done. They don't waste ammunition on a falling glider. Gravity and cruel aerodynamics will finish the task. Finally, the Komet appears breaking through the cloud deck, not the defiant rocket it once was. Now it is a heavy, awkward sled, wobbling in crosswinds, energy spent stripped of all grandeur. It descends steeply in dreadful silence. Hans watches the final approach with a knot in his stomach, tight as a fist. Landing a Me-163 is not flying. It is a controlled crash. With no wheels, the pilot must balance the aircraft on a single retractable skid under the fuselage. Any mistake costs a life. Too fast and the skid will dig into soft ground and flip the plane. Too slow and the heavy wings will stall and drop like a stone. Lucas is coming in too fast. Panic and adrenaline flooded after the chase, he misjudges his glide. The Komet carries too much speed as it crosses the fence line. The nose snaps upward as Lucas tries to bleed off momentum. The impact is sickening. The steel skid slams into the grass runway with a brutal crack. The aircraft doesn't settle, it bounces. The shock travels straight through the skid with no dampers bypassing any suspension and driving directly into the pilot's spine. Hans winces. He knows the medical reports on compression fractures by heart. But the landing isn't over. The plane strikes again, skidding violently sideways. A wingtip digs a deep trench into the soil. Drag spins the Komet in a savage pirouette, flinging mud and grass before it comes to rest tilted like a broken bird. Sirens erupt instantly, a mournful chorus signaling a race against time. Hans leaps into the rescue truck as it hurtles across the muddy field. He isn't looking for flames. Flames are honest and visible. He is looking for something far more treacherous, something that kills in silence. As the truck skids to a stop 10 meters from the wreck, Hans sees a thin white vapor hissing from the fuselage, coiling around the cockpit like a ghostly serpent. It is not smoke from an engine. It is chemical vapor. The crash ruptured a line. T-Stoff is leaking. The ground crew hesitates, instinct screaming at them to stay back. They have seen what this liquid does to organic matter. But Hans doesn't wait a second. He grabs heavy cutters and leaps from the truck boots, sinking into mud. The air burns with a bleach-like sting, searing eyes and throat. The Komet lies still, except for the angry hissing of oxidizer. The canopy is still locked. No movement inside, no desperate hands. Only silence, an unnatural, absolute silence. Hans screams for the firefighters to bring water, his voice cracking with desperation. Every second is chemistry at work. The crash didn't kill Icarus, but the wax is melting, and the rising sea of acid inside the sealed cockpit offers no escape. Silence cloaks the wreckage more heavily than the roars of battle. Hans climbs onto the wing, his boots slipping on its wet, muddy surface. The air is thick with a visible mist, a chemical haze leaking from a cracked line near the cockpit. It is no longer the smell of fuel, it is a sweet, nauseating stench. It triggers an ancient alarm in the reptile brain, the smell of biological life being destroyed. Hans holds his breath, his hand trembling as he reaches for the external canopy latch. The plexiglass is fogged from the inside, covered with dense condensation that hides the pilot from view. This is not human breath on cold glass. It is chemical steam proof that the cockpit has become a pressure cooker. With a grunt, Hans yanks the lever. The latch pops with a wet snap. The canopy flies open and a blast of white vapor explodes outward, striking Hans like a physical blow. He staggers back, coughing, eyes watering. The fumes burn his membranes, but he forces himself to look. He must know. He must bear witness. What he sees inside sears itself into his memory. The flight suit is still there. The heavy asbestos rubber suit he zipped an hour ago strapped tightly in place, swollen, retaining the shape of a human body. The flight helmet rests against the headrest, boots still braced on the rudder pedals. But Lucas is not there. The violence of the crash ruptured a T-Stoff line beside the seat. The concentrated peroxide sprayed directly onto the pilot, seeped through the seams of the suit, bypassed its protection, and reacted instantly with the organic matter inside. There is no blood. Blood has been consumed. Inside the collar, where a neck should be, there is only a bubbling sludge, the liquefied remnants of skin, muscle, and cartilage. A 19-year-old boy reduced to chemical soup. The ooze drips slowly onto the cockpit floor. The only recognizable pieces are inorganic metal buckles, goggle lenses, the thick leather of the boots. Lucas did not die from the crash. He was erased, dissolved by the machine he worshipped, digested while likely still conscious enough to scream. No sound could escape the sealed plexiglass tomb. Hans stands, frozen scream trapped in his throat, unable to comprehend the brutality before him. He is pulled from paralysis by the crunch of boots on gravel. The squadron commander arrives. The officer approaches, pressing a handkerchief to his face to block the fumes. He does not climb the wing. He does not look into the cockpit. He does not ask the pilot's name or final moments. Instead, he walks to the tail to inspect the rocket nozzle. He taps his command baton against the combustion chamber, nodding with satisfaction at its intact condition. Then he turns to Hans, his cold eyes issuing orders. He instructs the crew to hose out the cockpit, recover the guidance instruments, and strip the engine for installation into the next airframe. The pilot is waste to be washed away. Hans watches him leave and for the first time realizes that the true monster is not the aircraft, it is the system that created it. Spring comes to Germany not with warmth, but with the cold shadow of defeat. The roar of rockets has long faded, replaced by the rumble of American jeeps and foreign voices. Brandis Airfield is now a graveyard of ambition. Unexploded or unfired, Komets lie scattered in the tall grass, paint peeling, not futuristic weapons, but abandoned toys of a petulant child. Hans walks among them, no longer a crew chief, but a ghost haunting his own workplace. He watches the victors swarm the base, not with guns, but with cameras and notebooks. They are the men of Operation Paperclip intelligence officers and scientists, hungry for secrets Germany purchased with the blood of its youth. They treat Alexander Lippisch and his design team not as prisoners, but as celebrities. Hans watches from afar as Americans gush over the swept wings and tailless design. They run their hands along the aluminum skin, discussing Mach numbers and supersonic potential. They see the future of aviation. They see the blueprint for the F-86 Sabre, the Mirage, the Concorde, even the Space Shuttle. They look at the Komet and see a masterpiece of aerodynamics. They do not see the pink stains on the concrete. They do not smell the sweet rot of dissolved flesh still clinging to the cockpit lining. They do not see Lucas. One young American officer, bright-eyed, approaches Hans and gestures to the stack of technical documents he's guarding. He asks about fuel mixtures, thrust-to-weight ratios, glide characteristics. He wants to know how they achieved such speed. Hans looks at the man and for a moment wants to scream, to tell him that the speed was bought by stripping away humanity by turning pilots into disposable guidance chips for flying bombs. He wants to tell him about boys who screamed silently as they melted inside their flight suits, but he says nothing. He simply hands over the documents. The transaction is complete. The monster is not destroyed, it has been adopted. As trucks load dismantled aircraft and crates of research, Hans understands the final tragedy of the Me-163. It failed as a weapon, killing more of its own pilots than enemies, yet it succeeded spectacularly as a scientific pioneer. The world would take its wings, its rocket interceptor concepts, its obsession with speed, and build a new era upon them. The DNA of the Komet would live on in every Delta Wing fighter that shattered the sound barrier in the decades to come. But the cost would be scrubbed from the history books. The Komet would be remembered as a marvel, a wonder weapon, a documentary footnote. Hans turns away from the convoy and walks toward the airfield's edge where weeds grow over the scorched runway. He lights a cigarette, hand trembling not from cold, but from anger. The world will move on, faster, higher, deadlier. But he will remain. He will remain the keeper of the truth, the only one who remembers that the road to the stars was paved with the melted bones of children. The roar of engines is gone, but the silence that follows is deafening. It is the silence of a sentence that cannot be appealed, a sentence carried out by those who never had a choice. And that, my friends, is the true horror of the Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet. It is not merely a machine. It is a desperate gamble made by a regime that had lost its mind. Gambling with the lives of young men who had nothing left to lose. History often lingers on the glamorous surface of technology, speed records, breakthrough designs, the Delta Wings that shaped our modern world. But as we've seen today, when you strip away the metal shell, a far darker story emerges, one where human life is merely raw material, cheaper than the synthetic fuel that dissolved it. The Komet stands as a permanent reminder of what happens when performance outruns the value of existence. It asks us a difficult question. How much of our modern technological comfort is built on the bones of dangerous and unethical experiments of the past? The legacy of the Komet does not only live in the sky, it is a warning label for the price of progress. If this story shook you, if it made you look at those old warbirds differently, then I've done my job. If you want to join us as we unearth more dark secrets buried beneath the surface of history, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we dig up next. And I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Komet pilots were brave heroes or tragic victims of a system that betrayed them? Let's discuss. See you next time. Stay curious and remember, history is rarely as clean as the textbooks make it seem.